I found out my father was having an affair with my aunt. I never thought I'd be the one writing one of these stories, but here I am. I don't even know how to start this because it still feels like a bad dream that I can't wake up from. My family wasn't perfect, but we were close. I always thought we had a strong bond, one that couldn't be broken. I was wrong. It all started about 6 months ago when I noticed my dad acting weird. I don't mean the usual stuff like being stressed from work or distant. This was different. He was sneaking around, being secretive with his phone, and leaving the house at odd hours. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe he was planning something for my mom, like a surprise vacation or something. He'd done that before, planned these elaborate surprises for her, so I brushed it off. But then, things started to get strange. My mom would mention how my dad was working late more often than usual, and I started noticing how he was always texting someone. He'd step out of the room when his phone rang, and whenever I asked who he was talking to, he'd brush it off, saying it was just work stuff. Then one day I was helping him with something on his computer. He's not super tech savvy, and while I was showing him how to organize files, a message popped up on his screen. It was from my aunt, my mom's sister. The message wasn't normal, though. It wasn't something you'd expect from one sibling-in-law to another. It said, "I can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you so much." At first, I thought maybe I was reading too much into it. I mean, they're family. Maybe it was innocent, but the tone, the wording, it didn't sit right with me. Something about it felt off. I looked over at my dad, and he quickly closed the message and gave me this awkward smile like nothing was wrong. But I could tell something was. That's when my gut started telling me there was more to this than I realized. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I decided to pay more attention. I started noticing how my dad and my aunt would interact at family gatherings. They were always sitting close, whispering to each other, laughing at jokes no one else heard. At first, I thought it was just because they'd known each other for years, but now it felt different. I began feeling sick every time I saw them together. About a month later, things really blew up. My mom was out of town visiting a friend, and I was home alone. Dad had said he was going out for a few hours. I didn't think much of it at first, but later, I realized he'd left without his phone. When I went to grab my phone from the counter, I saw his phone sitting right there, lit up with another message from my aunt. This time it said, "I'm outside. Let me in." My stomach dropped. I shouldn't have, but I did. I opened the message and scrolled through their chat. What I saw was everything I had feared and more. There were weeks, no, months, of messages between them. And it wasn't just flirty texts. It was detailed plans, confessions of love, and worse, plans to meet up whenever they could. My father and my aunt. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I felt like I was going to throw up. This wasn't just a fling. It was At that point, I didn't know what to do. I was in shock. I couldn't even process what I'd just discovered. My mind was racing, thinking about my mom, about how this would destroy her, how this would blow up our entire family. But most of all, I felt this deep, painful betrayal. Not just because my dad was cheating on my mom, but because it was with someone so close to us, someone I trusted, my aunt. I heard the front door creak open, and I panicked. I put his phone back down and bolted upstairs to my room, my heart racing. I didn't want to face him. I didn't know what to say or how to act. I stayed in my room for the rest of the night, avoiding him, trying to calm down. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. The next day, I confronted him. He was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking his morning coffee, acting like everything was fine. I couldn't stand it. I walked up to him and said, "I know." He looked up at me, confused. "I know about you and Aunt Lisa," I said, my voice shaking. His face went pale. He stammered, trying to deny it at first, but I cut him off. "I saw the messages, Dad. All of them. Stop lying to me." There was this horrible silence between us. He just sat there, staring at his coffee, unable to look me in the eye. Finally, he said, "It's complicated." "Complicated?" I snapped. "You're cheating on Mom with her sister. How is that complicated?" He tried to explain himself, saying things had been rough between him and my mom, that he and my aunt had gotten close over the years, and it just happened. But I wasn't hearing it. "Do you even care about what this is going to do to Mom, to the family?" "I never wanted to hurt anyone," he said, like that made it any better. "But your mom and I haven't been happy for a long time. And Lisa..." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt like my whole world was crashing down. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about trust, loyalty, and how my father was willing to throw it all away. I told him I couldn't believe he would do something so awful, and I stormed out of the house before he could say another word. That was 2 weeks ago, and I still haven't told my mom. I don't know how. I don't even know if I should. Part of me feels like she deserves to know the truth, but another part of me doesn't want to be the one to break her heart like that. My aunt has been texting me, trying to talk, but I've been ignoring her. I can't even look at her right now. I'm so lost, and I feel like my entire family is hanging by a thread. If I tell my mom, it'll tear everything apart. But how can I keep something like this from her? Would you tell her? Would you expose your dad and risk destroying the family? Or would you stay quiet to protect her from the truth? I don't know what to do, and I feel like no matter what choice I make, someone's going to get hurt. A few days after confronting my dad, things started to unravel faster than I expected. I hadn't spoken to him since that conversation. I couldn't bring myself to face him, and every time I thought about telling my mom, my chest tightened. But then, things got even worse. I'm at home, scrolling through my phone, trying to zone out when I get a text. It's from my aunt, Aunt Lisa. I hadn't responded to any of her messages since I found out, but this one made my blood boil. She had the nerve to say, "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand." It wasn't supposed to go like this. Out of hand, I thought, like she didn't start this whole mess. I didn't respond, but I was pacing the room, shaking with anger. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she'd ruined everything. But instead, I threw my phone down and tried to calm myself. But then, a second text came through. "Your dad's planning to tell your mom. You need to be prepared." I froze. What? I hadn't even processed what I just read before my phone rang. It was my mom. My heart jumped into my throat. I didn't want to answer, but I knew I had to. When I picked up, she sounded completely normal, like nothing was wrong. "Hey, sweetie, I'm on my way home. Your dad wants to have a family dinner tonight. Can you help me with the groceries when I get in?" Family dinner? I could barely hold the phone without my hands shaking. My dad was going to drop this bomb at the dinner table? No warning, no heads up? I hung up and immediately texted my dad, "What the hell are you doing?" I got no response. The rest of the day felt like a ticking time bomb. I helped my mom unload the groceries, trying not to look her in the eye. I couldn't stand the thought of her smile disappearing when she found out the truth. She was happily chatting away, asking about my day, and I just nodded along, all the while thinking, you have no idea what's about to hit you. Dinner came around, and I sat there, barely able to eat. My dad was acting strangely quiet, like he was deep in thought, and I could see he was on edge. My mom, on the other hand, was in the best mood. She'd made one of her favorite meals, trying to make it a nice evening. It was tearing me apart knowing this was the calm before the storm. Then, halfway through the meal, my dad clears his throat. My heart started racing, and I could feel the tension building in the room. I looked down at my plate, gripping my fork so hard my knuckles were white. I have something I need to say, he started, his voice shaky. I felt like my mom looked over at him, her face soft and curious, completely unaware of what was about to come. "What is it, honey?" she asked. I couldn't take it anymore. Before my dad could say another word, I slammed my fork down on the table and blurted out, "He's been having an affair." The silence was deafening. My mom looked at me like I'd just slapped her. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. My dad's face went pale, and he stammered, "Wait, I was going to—" "No, don't you dare," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't you dare try to spin this. She deserves to know the truth." My mom was still staring at me, her face a mix of confusion and shock. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaking. I felt tears welling up in my eyes as I looked at her. "Dad's been cheating on you. With Aunt Lisa." She blinked, as if she didn't understand the words I just said. She turned to look at my dad, her face pale, her hands trembling. Is this true?" My dad opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at me, then back at my mom, and finally, he nodded. My mom's face crumbled. "With my sister?" she whispered, her voice breaking. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I felt sick to my stomach. I wanted to disappear, to be anywhere but here, watching my mother's world fall apart. She pushed back from the table, standing up so fast her chair nearly toppled over. She was shaking, her hands covering her face as the tears started flowing. "How could you?" she sobbed. "How could you do this to me?" My dad stood up too, reaching out for her. "Please, listen. I was going to tell you. I never wanted it to happen this way. I'm sorry, Sorry?" she screamed, stepping back from him like he was a stranger. "You've been sleeping with my sister and you're sorry? How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me?" He couldn't answer. He just stood there, speechless. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Did you know?" she asked, her voice barely holding it together. "Did you know about this?" "I found out a few weeks ago," I whispered, feeling the guilt wash over me. She looked betrayed, not just by him, but by me too. "You should have told me," she cried, turning her back to both of us. "I've been sitting here, making dinner, planning vacations, and you, both of you, knew this was happening?" "I didn't want to hurt you," I said, my voice breaking. I didn't know how to say it. My mom turned and stormed out of the room, her sobs echoing down the hallway. I could hear her slam the bedroom door, and I felt a wave of nausea hit me. My dad stood there looking lost, like he didn't know what to do next. "You've destroyed her," I said quietly, shaking my head in disgust. "And for what? For Lisa?" He didn't respond. He couldn't. And now here we are. My mom hasn't spoken to my dad since that night. Aunt Lisa's been blowing up my phone, but I blocked her. I don't know if my family will ever recover from this. Part of me feels guilty for being the one to drop the bomb, but I know she needed to hear the truth. But now that it's all out in the open, I'm left wondering, was I right to say something? Should I have stayed quiet a little longer and let him come clean on his own? I don't know what's going to happen next, but my family will never be the same.